about a scandal on the front page of your preferred daily or discussed on radio talk shows, on television and online. Stories like Red Alert, Westland's Underworld, Sins of Saviors, Stella's Web, and of course, Mara Heist have caused quite a stir because of their damning revelations. Kenya's investigative journalism has thrived throughout 2019, and as the year comes to a close, we want to look back at the biggest exposés and the journalists who brought them to light. We have gathered some of the country's leading investigative journalists to discuss the state of the sector. John-Allan Namu is the CEO and co-founder of Africa Uncensored, an investigative and in-depth online journalism production house. Paul Wafula is a financial investigative reporter and business editor with the Daily Nation. Asha Mwilu is the special projects editor at Citizen TV. And the host is Waihiga Mwaura, an investigative journalist and news anchor.
Welcome to another episode of Events 2019. This time round, we are focusing on the state of investigative journalism in Kenya. And joining me are my three guests who will help us take a look at the ins and outs, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the stories that you've been watching. And tell us this, which story has stood out most for you in terms of investigative journalism in Kenya in 2019? 22422 is our SMS line, and the hashtag is Events 2019. I think, John, I'll start with you. Which story stood out for you and why? Print, TV, radio? Which one was most memorable?
Hey, that's a tough one.
Well, because there were so many or so few?
Okay, let me start with the area that I'm familiar with, which is TV. And I mean, one of the two stories was done by you guys. So Mara Heist was, I was just telling you, the break that you caught with the whistleblower, the verification that you guys did with that, and then for me, because I'm a docu buff, the production of it was fantastic.
3 months ago, Citizen TV unearthed the wanton plunder that was going on at the Masai Mara University through the witness of bold whistleblowers.
Hata hii ng'ombe ingine kubwa ilisema inataka nyasi. Inasema pia iweke nyasi inasikia njaa.
But more than that, we have very memorable characters who you wonder about until this day, which leads me to your follow-up. I didn't watch it, but I thought that was a really good thing. The other one that stood out was done by NTV, White Alert.
Red Alert. Was
so there was Red Alert and then White Alert.
Right.
What I liked about White Alert more than Red Alert was the amount of scientific rigor that was brought to bear in that story. It was 1 hour, 26 minutes, I believe. I even talked to some students that I happened to be guest lecturing for some weeks back. And we broke it down in terms of hypothesis. But the reason that I liked that story is that it is a story that touches everybody, because everybody eats. Corruption scandals, like one after the other. So to be able to draw out one, to now talk about it like at length, is difficult.
As you think about it, let me bring in Asha Mwilu and just get her thoughts. What stood out for you, Asha?
I mean, I would say the same thing. Red Alert, I thought, was just very impactful. The fact that everyone in the nation just stood and said, what are we eating? And it's the first time we've had that conversation so clearly. But beyond that, I think right here at Citizen, Purity Mwambia, some of her work has just been super explosive. And looking at stories that touch on people, so her work at the hospitals, talking about patients who've been withheld because of payments.
These are the scenes that confronted us inside Kenya's largest hospital.
Westland's Underworld, which is a very simple story about this elderly couple that is being robbed of their money or of their belongings. But just the fact that she was so daring to touch people who would be considered untouchable, for me it's like hats off to Purity's work. Maybe if I can add one more. I don't know if you watched Enoch Sikolia's story, Garbage Rivers. I think Nation as well did a similar Toxic Flow, but Enoch had actually done a TV documentary on it. And immediately after he aired his story, went and tested the water actually at Nairobi River, showed the impact of that pollution, and you could see how NEMA was now scrambling all of a sudden. So I think for me, what has stood out 2019 is just the impact of the stories. That you do a story and it just jolts the public or jolts the government into action. Yeah.
And if I can add to that, the consistency with which the stories were coming out, meaning that as one team in one media house were releasing a story, another one had been investigating another that would come out shortly.
It was actually a very good year for investigative reporting.
You would term it that way.
It was a very good year in terms of the sheer number of reports that came out. I can't recall a year that it has been this good.
In the time that you've been in this space?
Yeah, honestly, in terms of the number of stories that have come out. That means that, you know, what my personal desire has been is sort of coming to fruition in one way or another, which is investigative reporting becomes a mainstream part of reporting in every newsroom, right?
You helped refresh his memory on print stories that stood out. For me, I'll talk about one of them, Smuggled from Nairobi to Johannesburg by Beatrice Kangai. Powerful story about a journalist who was embedded with these smugglers and found her way to South Africa, got arrested for a couple of days
in South Africa.
Just to tell that powerful story. Tell us more about that.
It was a brilliant piece. You can imagine the time that you spent, and you now say, okay, fine, I've had enough, let me try it out. And you are there by road, 2 weeks on the road, and you are down in South Africa, you are arrested, and you come back after surviving the arrest. You know, she will have been jailed. And so this is not a person that has a big name before. You don't, if you check her out, if you said I'm doing an investigation, if you are an agency around, you know, the continent, you want to check what is your previous work for us to prove. That is not there. So you end up, you know, with somebody that you don't know, but then she came back and did a very bold story. I think that was a brilliant piece. Remember, we've also been very hard at the Daily Nation on corruption, and as rightly so, as you said, we have done a number of big stories until you get to a point where people are asking, which other billions have been lost from Kenya Pipeline, Kenya Power, everywhere the money has been lost. We have been there.
And I know they'll want to respond to that, and I want to give you some wider context. What impact do you think exposés like the ones he's talked about, where money has been lost, has had on governance and on wider society? And maybe, Asha, we could start with you. I'm sure you've read a lot of the exposés that they've had.
I mean, I think to begin with, just the fact that Kenyans can now begin to sort of like visualize what this animal called corruption is all about. Like the Kimorere and Aurora dam scandal, you know, when Nation was telling us little tidbits like towels and how much they were paying for towels for a dam construction, why are we even paying for that in the first place? It's just that impact that now Kenyans can sit back and say, guys, enough is enough. And I think that has been like a massive win for what the nation has done. Standard as well, I think. And the fact that we have been so unrelenting, you know, like it's this time, we're going to follow up on it. Here, the second page after 2 weeks, this is where we are with this scandal. I think that's just been brilliant. So as TV is exposing all these social ills as well on Sundays, like the papers almost daily has just been sustaining this coverage. I think accountability reporting has really just come up through investigative reporting as well. Just keeping government accountable for me, I would say,
was a big plus for you in 2019. John, before you come in, Paul, I want to get your mind on this. Are there concerns when you see numerous investigative exposés in papers, on TV as well, but the source, the build-up to how that information came to the newsroom still remains unclear? Has there been a discussion in your newsroom?
Yes, that has always been a discussion.
You can't trace the journey that the reporter took to get those facts.
Exactly. So when you leave all that out, people sometimes miss out on the bigger picture of the story, so to speak. For instance, if you just came up with a story and you are giving people just the story as it has happened before you give people enough context, you find now those are the stories that either go left or they go right, depending on the reception. So right now you need to give people context, a lot of context with your stories, the way, you know, how you sourced them, how you made them, sure that you have tied all the loose ends. And even editors are sitting back now to ask those hard questions.
That you're not being used to fight somebody else.
Because a story walks in, a very good story, I mean, the person who's come with it, you look at their previous record, they have hardly written anything. In fact, their grammar is usually wanting, and all of a sudden they come with a neatly written story, and you're like, oh my, this is a beautiful story. But if you went 2 steps back, you realize, wow, this story is coming to score some goals. So that is now the bigger risk, because you want to be sure that you're not there fighting other people's battles as you're being used in the name of investigative journalism.
Right.
Yeah.
John, any thoughts? Has that also happened?
So I have 2 thoughts about the impact of investigative reporting. One positive, the other one not so much. Positive for all of the reasons that you guys have talked about. I mean, accountability reporting is something that is becoming somewhat of a mainstay, right? we are now opening our eyes to things like people being used for hatchet jobs, right? In spite of there being the odd headline, the odd story that has leaked out, and you're like, you can't really, what you said about sourcing where the journey that the story traveled, right? For me, but this is specific to corruption reporting and then reporting in general. And it happened actually interestingly. The example I'll give is one that really upset me. When Moses Kuria, I think he was on Citizen, and he started to talk about the finance and budget committees in Parliament turning a blind eye to potential to corruption, essentially.
It was at a parliamentary committee, but it was live on Citizen.
Yes.
Yes.
I want to say that we have lied to Kenyans, first of all. And second thing is that we have failed in our oversight responsibility. The reason we are in this hole is because as Parliament, we could have said no, but we said yes. So,
turning a blind eye for a number of years to the kind of theft and malfeasance that was happening in the Treasury because they wanted to be, I think in his words, respectful of the president, right? Why that for me is bad for investigative reporting is that it tells you that, as a friend of mine says, we are now living in a post-shame society. So the people who are supposed to be held accountable, like really don't care, even if they're saying, oh, by the way, yeah, I was involved in a sin of omission when a crime against the country was taking place, right? And in spite of all of the reporting that happened, because remember it was around the Eurobond, it was around corruption earlier, and then the debt crisis as well. Remember when the debt ceiling was being challenged in 2015, right? The amount of the PR that came from the government specifically to kill those stories and confuse the public was such that now people are waking up and they're like, my God, you mean this was happening when it had been happening all along?
We have a central bank governor who's actually raised concerns about the way
when
Treasury has been in the past.
If the governor calls it abracadabra.
That was the word.
I remember we wrote that story like 3 years ago, and we said Treasury is cooking books.
Yes.
And everyone was up in arms. They were like, how do you even say something like that? And we said, look at the books, please read. The budget office in Parliament was saying almost the same thing.
Yeah.
People don't want to pay attention to that.
Yes.
And so when things come up the other side, you know, and this is usually sometimes the challenge that you face as an investigative reporter. When you are ahead of the story and you're like saying, look guys, this thing is happening and it's not the right time, maybe it's not politically correct, or it's not,
but
people don't want to
deal
hear
with the consequences.
Exactly.
So people are like, no, this is not something you should be telling us right now. Let the country, move on. We are okay.
Yes.
Until things, let the country heal. Let us love peace. We
Yes.
have a beautiful country. We've just taken over. You guys, you always report negative news about us. When people read stories about Kenya, only negative stories. And then you are seated there, you are like, okay, let us find things to celebrate the country. And we do that, even at the Nation. If you look at our page 2, it's always something nice about the country.
I think that's a good place to take a break. We're looking at the state of investigative journalism in 2019 here on Events 2019. One could say it was one of the best years, but also one of the worst, if that's what I'm getting here from some of my guests here today. Let's take that break. We'll come back with a bit